to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. We are online at what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find the link to our blog in the episode notes. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, share your favorite episode. My name is Andy Lipson. I'm a teacher in Oakland and socialist. And we are again joined by regular guest or regular member, Kenny Zapata, socialist and community organizer. And again, Jessica, English literature and writing and environmental humanities teacher at a university level in Pacific Northwest. And John Klyczek, author of School World Order, The Technocratic Globalization of Corporatized Education, and a frequent contributor to Unlimited Hangout, and author of a very recent article, which probably will come up today, and was posted in Unlimited Hangout, How Education International is pushing teachers union into the fourth industrial revolution. So welcome, everyone.
Always good to be here. Thank you very much, sir.
As the title of Jake's recent article suggests, we still plan on doing part two of some of the art stuff that we were getting into as it relates to transhumanism and transgender and queer identity and things like that, or queer theory. But today we really wanted to kind of come back to some of the discussions that have been going on around education and the so-called spread of the Omicron variant. My school today, I'm working at a new school, which didn't go remote before, but actually here in Oakland, went remote this week. So in relationship to orders that came from on high, from what I've told, that you should not be doing school this week. And I know in the Bay Area, there's been a lot of pressure on from members and from the union itself, talking about how it is not safe to go back into the schools, and teachers and teachers unions, at least in the Bay Area, are seemingly poised to push for not going back to school and trying to go remote. I'm just going to say I'm very disturbed by this. It's very bothersome. There's more to say about it, but I figured first maybe go around the horn and see what people know about other instances of this kind of stuff going on. And Jessica, maybe I'll go with you next.
Sure. I too find it bothersome. I think that's a very polite word. Yeah, so I guess I'll say a few words about my former institution, and then I'll say a few words about my current institution. So they are doing something similar at University of Washington. They basically announced, I'm not sure how many days before winter term was supposed to start, like it was literally a matter of days, I believe, that they were going to go online for 1 week. I guess the alleged reasoning there is that it would give people time to get tested and or to get the booster between, all of the holiday festivities, students going home, traveling, and the start of classes. I believe they are now going to be in person starting next week, allegedly. I know there's a lot of schools that have been doing something similar. I know Seattle University, they are online for all of January. I know a lot of the Ivy League schools are temporarily remote. So this seems to be a trend. I think it's really, on the one hand, people are saying like, oh, it's just a week, just one more week, right? But I think, especially from, being a teacher, like from a teacher perspective, what even just that like 5 days, what that means is that every single teacher at these institutions is going to have to build their week one lesson plans, their modules, their syllabus, all of that like groundwork for the class has to be online, which means that the foot's already in the door. Like online will be like whether or not UW or Seattle U or wherever, like whether or not they end up actually going back to in person, online's like the baseline now. Remote is the baseline. And kind of like you mentioned, Annie, I'm seeing so many colleagues and teachers, not just at like my former institution, but all around the country, just like begging to go back remote. And I can't believe we're back here. I mean, I'm not surprised at all, but it's amazing to me for a variant that is, even by the most mainstream establishment scientists, the most mild version so far. I also should mention, so University of Washington, after they basically kicked out or forced out the majority of unvaccinated people, both employees and students, I believe they're now at like a 98 or it might even be 99% vaccination rate across the entire institution. This is like a massive, massive public university. So I mean, I don't know, like, I guess you could get to 100, but I'm not really sure like how much higher, of a standard they could have in terms of so-called protection. So yeah, that's what's going on in Washington, where I am, which as I've mentioned in previous episodes, I'm now at a much more rural, smaller university, and we are in person so far. I mean, we're in week 1. So I think we'll probably stay in person is my expectation and definitely my hope. This is actually the first time I've been fully like 100% of my classes from the start of the term are completely in person since beginning of 2020. So that's really exciting despite everything that's going on. We do have, so they're testing unvaccinated students as a precondition for coming back to in-person classes. They're not testing vaccinated, which I've heard people like faculty and staff kind of complaining on more than one occasion that they think they should be doing more like robust testing, just of everybody, because so many vaccinated people are testing positive recently. But yeah, I mean, it's very disturbing to me. Like, I received a list of students in my classes who were not cleared for in-person learning at the beginning of the week because they were still waiting for their COVID tests to come back. So, I mean, even just from a privacy standpoint, you might as well send me a list of students and that says like, here are your unvaccinated students. So that was very disturbing to me in terms of like data protection and who's getting to see this information, private medical decisions. I've had students emailing me like, my test was positive or my test was negative, which is just, it's none of my business. And I've had students miss class during, the beginning of the class is extremely important to be there to kind of discuss the foundation for the term. And yeah, I have students who are they're waiting on their test because it had to be taken like, I think 48 hours or something, 72 hours maybe, which was ridiculous. On top of that, we had a huge snowstorm. We actually had a snow day on day 1 of the term. So, a lot of the testing was delayed. It's just a nightmare. So yeah, that's kind of what's going on for me. I don't know if I've mentioned this before. So ever since I started this new job, I have to attest daily to both my vaccination status and like if I have symptoms or not, which I think those attestations are they've become pretty common. I don't know how many institutions are making people do them daily, but it's crazy to me. Like, I have to click a button every single day to let them know, yes, I am still unvaccinated. Like, I have not changed my mind. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Can I ask Jessica a question real quick? About so when you got the list of the people who were not cleared, the students who were not cleared, was that through email or did that? I remember you telling us a story one time where some of that information came through one of the LMSs, like the Clever or the Newton or one of those LMS.
Yeah, Navigate. Yeah. No, that was a different situation where it was like because of someone's vaccination status, they were placed on a hold, like a registration hold. And so it showed up in the system, which was, it was another example of privacy violations, in my opinion. not in my opinion, I mean, just objectively. But yeah, no, this list came through student affairs, I think, through email. I don't know what they're using to track stuff in terms of if it's like mark sheets or whatever, but yeah, it was through email.
Yeah, I was just curious because when we talk, I imagine we're going to get into talk about testing today in some detail, and I was just curious as to how that played out, because we'll probably touch on how some of these testing companies also traffic in the genomic sequencing and some of the correlations that you can make between the dashboard and the testing, given how they might process the testing sample. So for Chicago, so for my own institutions, again, I think I've said this a few times on this show, but I knew the mandates were coming, so I dodged going back in person because I didn't want to have to either get the jab, and I don't want to get tested. They don't need my bio data for any purposes. And so, I don't know exactly what they're doing differently. I did hear at one of the schools, but see, we don't go back yet. We don't actually, the semesters don't start at either of the two community colleges where I teach. They don't start until 17th or the 19th. I think it's the 19th, one's the 17th. And at one of the schools, there was just an email from the dean that the staff who should be there now, like, registration and human resources, those type of people, that they are remote right now. So I mean, I guess if they extend this period, then I'm assuming everybody's going to be where I'm at, which is online. That's another reason too why I didn't want to go back in person prior, because I also anticipated that, best case scenario would be one where, you have to play musical chairs between the classroom and the at home, remote virtual stuff. And I didn't want to like Jessica was saying, like, they largely want us to have everything loaded on the learning management systems in case. But even if it's loaded there, if you have in your mind, okay, I'm going to be doing an in-person lesson, it's going to be a different style of delivery, and you're probably going to need some handouts and things like that. And so you're still going to be like having to reorient exactly how you're going to approach your lesson from week to week. So if I'm going to do that, I'm just going to stay online. And so what CPS is doing, Chicago Public School System, I want to say it's the third largest school district in the country. This came from the union, and so I want to say in an article I had read through today, I want to say it was 73% of the union members who voted to not go back to in person. And the main beef that they had, or the main reason why they don't want to go back in person, is they feel like there's not enough testing. And I saw part of one of these articles, they had pictures of the testing that they were getting for people. I'm assuming they were all the testing was for unvaccinated students, but they were delivering these testing kits through FedEx at these these drop boxes, and they had pictures of the drop boxes overfilled with the testing kits and like stacked on top of them and stacked on the sides of them, and they were saying that they weren't able to process them. And incidentally, I discovered that I thought it was mainly a company called Shield that was processing the COVID test here, but apparently Color Labs is also has some contracts with Chicago Public School System. And there were several, I was peeked at, CNN and Fox today, and on both they had interviewed some people from CPS. To basically give the rationale for why they want to withhold in-person learning. Some of it has to do with this whole Omicron thing, but mainly what they want is more testing. And it sounded like one of the spokespeople from the union, it sounded like they wanted everybody tested, not just those who are unvaccinated. And we all agree that factually, right? If you're vaccinated, you can still transmit it. And so at least I guess they would have a even standard, for everybody. But I don't want anybody being tested, so I'm not cool with that. But I guess at least it's not a double standard as far as who can transmit. So that's pretty much what's going on in the Chicagoland area as far as school closures.
So Jake, do I have this right? They canceled school today because of the union vote, right?
Yes, correct. Yeah, yeah, and yeah, it sounded like it almost sounded like they weren't prepared to go online. It almost sounded like for now they're just in limbo. Like they haven't shifted to just where we're going to go remote. It almost sounds like they're waiting to even start the semester. But I'm guessing that if they're going to postpone, that they're going to shift to remote. So.
Well, I read too. I was trying to find it. I read this morning something about how like the city had locked all of the Chicago teachers out of their, I think it's Google. It's like the Google Classroom, right? That they use for an online platform. So they actually disabled teacher access to that so that basically like students couldn't contact their students, like even if they wanted to during the strike, like presumably either to try to teach remotely or to I don't know. But I just thought that was interesting, because it's like it's just such a like perfect example of like, well, this is what you're asking for. You're asking for like centralized control, which can be turned on, turned off at the drop of a hat. Like, anyway.
Yeah, I know. I don't. Most of I wasn't reading super in depth, but it did sound like something like that. That's what I gathered from some of the skimming I was doing. So yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting that they would, that maybe part of the rationale for that, basically blocking communications might be, that, as I mentioned, it's largely the teachers unions, the union members who have voted. And it might be the case that the parents and the students have opposite opinions, and they might be contacting the teachers like, hey, what's up? Why aren't we going? And, without that communication, maybe that could possibly have swayed maybe some people. I was very surprised that it was over 25% of teachers said that they ostensibly wanted to go back in person. I thought that was a lot based on my experience with this, how it's gone over the last couple of years. But
maybe it was because they didn't put out a interpretive dance video this time around. Did you guys remember? That was Chicago, right?
Yeah, I don't remember if it was Chicago. It would not.
I'm pretty sure it was.
It probably was. Yeah.
I don't know about that, but I want to see if Kenny, is there any things you want to add to this or say about what you've either heard or thoughts you've had about what's recently gone on?
Well, I know about Chicago. I know that being in the news, about the teachers union in Chicago, kind of spearheading that movement to go back to remote learning. I mean, I'm not in education. I'm in the restaurant business, and in San Francisco, I know Color Labs very well. That's a dominant contract in this city, and they have my DNA. I've had at least over 40 tests with them. What I do know, it's happened on my industry that also relates to the pressure for more testing. Because there is some mass hysteria in San Francisco right now. In terms of testing, I am vaccinated. As people know in previous episode, I was forced to get vaccinated for family matters. And I think I have the Omni cold, I call it, because it's not something severe. My partner also has it. It hit her a little hard. She's actually been sick multiple times this year, and she was vaccinated way before than I did. And so I also know that the person she probably got it from, if you believe the PCR test, right, is boosted up weeks ago. I myself, I'm waiting for my test. I'm freshly vaccinated. I'm at the peak vaccination right now. I'm like a month removed from my vaccination, and so I'm having the same symptoms that unvaccinated people have. like my friends who like are really struggling with being forced to get vaccinated. And so just going back to, the hysteria, I know that people here in the city are fighting for home test kits, which kind of, in my view, loosely links to this, because Biden had dropped a hint, right, that he was going to set up 500 million test kits or some sort of BS like that, right? And then, it kind of rings a bell when you, Jessica, say that, a centralized form of testing. Because right now there is also these loose, companies doing testing. There is no, centralized form. And at some point, we are going to have, because from the narrative that we're saying, right, that this is not about vaccination. This is not about public health. This is about data tracking, vaccine passports. I wonder if that's like where that move is going to come, from the decentralized state in order to come and save us from this scarcity of test kits, regardless of, the fact that this is not, by their own narrative, like you said, Jessica, this is not even close to anything they were narrating before, like in terms of the deadliness, and the story is not that, the vaccinated are spreading this shit in mass, and they're, testing positive in mass, like in San Francisco. We're probably, I don't know what the vaccination rate is here, but we're definitely one of the most compliant cities in this whole nation. And, I know so many people right now, that have tested positive, some of which have symptoms. And again, it just brings a challenge to the narrative that, like you said, Jake, that we've challenged on this show, that we've always said, and we've gotten censored, coerced, manipulated, blacklisted, disowned by different people for saying that these vaccines were never designed to stop transmission. And recently I read an article, in doing research for this, that where the AP, AP News, what is it?
Yeah.
AP News. They're trying to explain and spin, why are people explaining why people mistakenly believed that vaccination would stop transmission, when in reality, that was the whole premise of the mandates. And that is not the conversation. That is not the challenge. The story is lack of test kits, right? The story is more testing. The story is like considering some form of, lockdowns or those tactics that were used previously, which lead us to remote work and remote learning. Right. And so that's been my experience. And, it's just frustrating because I literally had a conversation with my bosses because I fear I was going to lose my job, saying that the main reason, this is before vaccines they were beginning to be available, that the reason I wasn't going to get it was because, again, they do not stop transmission and we don't know long-term effects. And both those things I think are true. And actually, I just wanted to share, I don't know for certain, this is, I have a skin condition, I think it's psoriasis, and so it's an immune response, right? It's the body attacking itself. It's a hyperactive, immune response. And so my vaccine arm has been hurting since I got this Omni-Cold. Like it's been that spot, and like my arm has been tingling. And I've also been itchy. Like I've had flare-ups of these things on my skin. I can't trust to go to the doctor because the doctor, I would be dismissed. Because it's over 2 weeks, right, since the vaccine. So these are things that we don't know, right? I'm not saying for certain that that's what's happening, but it's just the fact that the entire system is built to just push for the vaccines, in the segregation of people who challenge this narrative, right? And yeah, sorry, just I hope that kind of that has been my experience. That's what I'm dealing with. It's not so much in the educational field, but it obviously relates to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually, for me, there are so many mind fucks in all of this, because I mean, I know, Jake, in your article, you talk about how the essentially global unions, the GUF, Global Union Federation, and EI stands for Education International or something like that.
Education International.
Yeah, like, and these things are connected to NEA and AFT. So, and of course, all these things are connected to WEF and UNESCO. And I think you attribute that to like the globalist aims. I might look at that a little differently in terms of where the aims are. I still look at them as more nationalist aims, but whatever. It's coming from on top. All right, that's when we would definitely agree on, and that's our top of our national unions to our state unions. But on the ground, what I face is my colleagues, my fellow workers, pushing for building the biosecurity state and pushing for building the all remote, replace my job with AI, collect data on all our students, keep them all separated, and keep us all separated, keep our students separated, prepare everyone for the fourth industrial revolution that you wrote about, and so our heads are being fixed, and our heads have already been fixed, but it's weird to find myself between the union president of Chicago and Lori Lightfoot, to find myself, well, I think Lori Lightfoot's actually making a little more sense, in terms of this is going to mess up students. What Lori Lightfoot doesn't want to say is, she just keeps on saying vaccines, 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 as an answer, which it isn't. There is no answer from people like Lori Lightfoot, but the problem is there definitely is no answer from our unions, not just way up, but really here on the ground, and from our own members who are pushing, I would say, in the name of health and safety, pushing a disastrous plan for me, when I think about my former union, and some of the unions around me, pushing for testing, pushing for full vaccination, pushing for more N98, N95 masks for everyone, it's almost like our unions have gone out and said, how do we build a stronger surveillance state? So we are going to push for that. We're going to push for everything that's going to strengthen the hand of the state. We're going to build stronger prisons. We're going to make, we want the INS to be stronger. We want the police to be stronger. Like, it would be like everyone who I've been working with cheerleading for that kind of program. And to do so in the name of the health and safety. And I do have to show this, although I will tell you, if you're listening from the vantage point of a person who wants to shut down the schools, for some reason, these numbers don't matter to people when you talk about the health and safety part of this. I guess I'll start with a quote from Jesse Sharkey, the president of the union. And it's the same stuff we're hearing from our members. Right now, going to school puts us at risk, puts our students and families at risk. That's the simple truth of the matter. This is a virus that's raging through the city, right? This is the kind of stuff they're talking about in Chicago and here in the Bay Area. Well, first, I got to start with this. This is the CDC numbers, okay? And Jake's talked about it. I think Jessica's talked about it. These are the infection fatality rates that you can see off the CDC. And this was put out back in April or May, pretty much when Delta was starting, May of 2021. And if you look at these numbers right here, all right, let's see, right down here, 20 out of 1, meaning if you have 1 million people infected, how many people are going to die, right? And if you're 0 to 17, it's 20. If you're below 50 to 18, it's 500. And if it's 50 to 64, it's 6,000. This was back in April. All these three.
This is with COVID, right?
This is with COVID, right? This is if you have a positive infection, not case fatality rate, but you're believed to have COVID, the symptoms of COVID. All right. These numbers are all equal to or lower than flu. Lower in the case of 0 to 17. The numbers are higher, 4 or 5 times higher for the elderly in terms of the infection fatality rate for COVID. That's about it. And that number has kind of come down over time. Now this is the deadliest thing we're talking about here. This is as deadly as COVID was, which was basically the flu for everyone 64 or younger. And that's April 2021. And when you look at the VOE study on, it was a British study on what Omicron is, what do they say about it? Researchers looked at symptoms reported between October 13th and October 10th, and compared those to the most recent, December 3rd and December 10th, when Omicron was spreading. So here are the top 5 symptoms reported in December: runny nose, headache, fatigue, either mild or severe, sneezing, and sore throat. So this is what people are losing their minds about. And this is mainstream crap. And
I'm gonna lose my mind over what it says at the top. Sorry.
What does it say? Scientists use ostrich cells. Oh my gosh.
Different
Okay. Well,
conversation.
interesting. Anyway, so it is crazy to me that, like, this is where it's like people are in this weird kind of state where these are the actual numbers. This is actually what's being put out by the mainstream, although you don't hear a lot about infection and fatality rate. You just hear case numbers, case numbers, case numbers. And people are still terrified. And the terror has got teachers, and teachers are at the front lines of terror, actually, of being terrified. And they are the ones who are like pushing for this from below. And I just don't even know where to start with that thing. It just messes with my head.
It's so hard not to just be infuriated with my colleagues, our colleagues, I think. I mean, I know it's not the fault of the working class, but it is so incredibly frustrating to watch. Again, teachers selling out their students and themselves, even from a selfish point of view. But having like talked to students, I just don't understand how anyone could think that we should shut down again. Like, it will hurt them. It will hurt them. And it will disproportionately hurt Black students, poor students, students with learning disabilities. I would argue it will hurt every single student, but certainly if you care about equity and all of that,
And
diversity.
I don't have the numbers exactly, but I imagine that, death for young people 0 to 17 is a lot higher from suicide as a result of this bullshit.
It is.
Of the lockdowns, of the loss of, social interaction, especially during the key years of socializing and development, right? For the brain, you and Eduardo Lipson interviewed psychologists, right?
Yeah.
On that topic, people can look at that episode. But again, is supposedly we want to protect kids, right? And this framework of social justice gets advanced, and at least for the left, that I think that is what kind of plays in the mind, because it's almost automatic. We've talked about the cult thinking, right, in previous episodes too, of the left. And I think that this is where that comes into hand, and especially in a situation where we had a president that supposedly, on the narrative from the left, was attacking science, right? So now we live in a situation where the so-called experts can't be challenged, and we have people like Dr. Fauci saying that they are science, and if you attack him, he is science, even though he's been lying to his fucking teeth left and right. You don't have to be an expert or a college-educated person to know that when someone is changing their story often and shit doesn't add up, they're fucking lying to you.
And I would add that you always believe the part that when they talk out two sides of their mouth, you always believe the side that benefits you the least. Because if it was the one that benefited you the most, you don't need to talk out the other side, right? I mean, that's another layer to that I would add. But I'm curious, I want to ask, so I mentioned that in Chicago, a lot of the push to go remote has come from the unions. In Washington and in California, in your experiences, Jessica and Andy, is it largely the unions or the district or the mayor, the governor, et cetera?
I would just say that my experience of the push is like it's coming from the grassroots almost, if you would call it that, right? It feels like it's coming from our members pushing our union and our union starting to move. The district doesn't want to do this. The district has got all sorts of issues right now. I mean, look, I do believe that that the long-term plan of being able to pull us in and out of remote is very useful for the plan of creating schools for the fourth industrial revolution. So I do see, but this particular operation, didn't feel initiated by the district. The district is trying to like not deal with the union. The union leadership is getting pressure from its members. It's possibly getting pressure from its unions up above, but it ain't coming from Newsom as far as I can tell. This feels like it's coming from below. Although of course there's been a massive head fixing operation on teachers, so they're just doing what the state tells them. But in some ways, the district is being seen as dragging its feet on the health and safety of teachers and students.
Yeah, I think like at the university level, it's kind of similar. Like right now, there's a real tension between like the institutional administration, like for example at UW, and the faculty and teachers and the unions and the grassroots organizers. Because at this point, I think the institution loses money if they go remote, at least in the short term. And they also look weaker and weaker and stupider every time they like flip-flop. But yeah, I mean, faculty's begging for it. And I got an email from I'm still on like my former union email list. I got an email today where they're organizing like I don't think it was a petition. I think it was just kind of like a letter filing grievances, because according to their contract, like workers are not supposed to be subjected to threats, right? Health and safety threats on the job. So they filed grievances or are filing grievances against the administration. They're asking or demanding that anybody who wishes to work remote must be granted that wish. They're asking for like N95s, more testing, more PPE. Yeah, so I would agree. I do think, I don't know, at the state level, with the testing stuff and like the surveillance that you all have been speaking to, I think, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to tell. It's an echo chamber. Like I hear faculty and workers begging for more testing. Like, oh, we don't have enough tests. We can't get hold of them. It's an access issue. They should send them to our doors. They should test everybody. But then I know like for Washington, I think Inslee gave another press conference or whatever today. And it was all about like pumping up the at-home testing regimen, which I do think is going to be like a real point of focus, like moving forward, part of this whole like permanent surveillance apparatus. And I know like for Washington, their testing kits, which people like teachers are begging for, like the push to distribute more means that they're partnering up with corporations, like they're partnering up with, philanthropic health and human rights defenders like Amazon and Microsoft. I mean, it's just, it's such a joke. And it's all like, if you read any email from the union, it's all the language of surveillance. Like we have to monitor this situation, sick until proven healthy.
I don't think any of this happens without compliance from the bottom. In order to gain compliance from the bottom, you need, the narrative to be driven into, drilled in, and at this point, we are in a situation where, like you said, Lipson, earlier, facts don't matter. It's a cult. It's cult thinking. I was actually browsing today, and I like Kim Iverson. She on YouTube. She tends to report. She reports more than about stuff that aligns more with what we're arguing, right? Like and I was interested by this term, mass formation psychosis. That was brought up in Joe Rogan's show, And I was shocked because you can argue confirmation bias on my end, but to me it explains what I've been interpreting as happening around me. These people basically begging for the lock and key system, that is being constructed, that our liberty, our lives have been held at ransom, right? And then I remember I saw also a quote that I wrote years ago about that people in power weaponize fear to tell us that we need them, and so here we are. I don't even think like we can rationalize this. I've tried to have conversations with people. Some I actually one person in my life that I used to work with did call my brother to apologize, over the harassment once they heard our episode where I was talking about the personal toll that it was taking. So I don't think this will be handled in just a logical terms. It has to be handled in a human way, right? Like that's what we have to relate and show people how this is destroying lives, and I don't wanna dive too much into like suffering porn, but like on a personal level, this person saw that, and is seeing more of the arguments that I was making over a year ago, that vaccine passports were on their way. This person has a master's in civil engineering, by the way, and their partner works for Stanford, basically, what is it? Or looking at grants in biotech, right? And she was certain that I was wrong, certain that I was wrong, that I was anti-science, that I was an anti-vaxxer. And again, these are people in that field, or I have a friend who works in biotech, who has shown me data, to prove that vaccines do stop transmission. And so my point is that rationality, logic, facts, this term mass, what is it again? Mass formation psychosis can be used against anybody. They can use it against us. They can say that we are the psychotic people.
Yeah.
So, like, again, I don't think we handle this on like just a debate type of way. Like it has to be handled in a more human way where we relate to each other and we know they're in the same struggle, in a way.
Yeah, I'm reminded of to tie what you, Kenny, said with something that Andy said, and that is this on and off switch. This, we're remote, we're not, we're in person. You need testing, you need a vaccine. Wait a minute, I need to go back home. And it's basically Simon Says, right? Like when I jump, you say how high. And I've talked a lot about the Skinner method and different forms of psychological conditioning, classical behaviorist operant. And all of what they have in common is the concept that you can condition behaviors through the scheduling of rewards and punishments. But there was also studies that they did where they studied something called learned helplessness. And so what they discovered that you could do in training animals was if you were to discombobulate the reward and punishment schedule in a way that the animal has no sense, there's no pattern, there's no organization to it, it doesn't understand why or when it's being punished or rewarded, then eventually what it does is it's called learned helplessness. Like it'll just lay there and it'll just stop responding to pretty much any sort of stimuli in any cohesive way. And that's sort of, I feel like that it also relates to something that John Taylor Gatto talks about, and he wrote the book, The Underground History of American Education. He wrote this piece called Against Schooling, and in it he looks at these different principles of education by Alexander Inglis, and he was the head of the education department in Harvard in early 20th century, and he had these various principles. And in one of the principles, they discussed, how to make people obedient. And the concept, the way that you could really tell if your students or your subjects were obedient was if you could get them to obey nonsensical orders, right? Because that's how you know that they're totally obedient. Because if they're obeying orders that could be in that person's own self-interest, you never really know if they're obeying because it's good for them and they're following their own self-interest, or if they're obeying because you tell them. But if you can get them to do nonsensical stuff that is not within their own self-interest and has no logical rationale, then you know that you have them under your thumb. Basically, you know that basically anything you say, right? You could say mask on one day, one mask, two mask, red mask, blue mask. You know what I mean? Like that, and they will comply. And I think that's possibly one of the angles of why they're doing this this on and off switch. Another thing that I think about the timing of and how the issue of testing is coming up in this recent off switch is if the EUA on the PCR tests is getting ready to go bye-bye, right? And so at the same time, right around now, we're talking about, we don't have enough tests. And so I wonder how that's going to drive whatever's going to be the alternative for, whatever they're going to replace the PCR with, or maybe they'll re-extend it. I don't know, but the timing of it and that method, this on and off, there's something else going on there, I think.
Just real quick, and so that again, just like with teachers, right, asking for this stuff and actually pushing from the bottom for these surveillance systems. In San Francisco too, like this proof of vaccination drive came before the city even implemented it. Restaurants and bars were asking for it. And as a matter of fact, right now, there are already restaurants and cafes starting to ask for the booster shot in San Francisco.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to mention is the only other area that's going on here, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, is there is another round of booster discussion, boosters for 5 to 12-year-olds or 12 to 17. I know at the higher ed colleges, a whole round of boosters are being forced on students at UCs here and CSUs here in California in order to attend in-person learning. So there's a number of little games that are being played: increased testing, boosters, vaccines, going remote. Every one of these things fits right into the piece of the puzzle being put together around what I would say the capitalist class and the fourth industrial revolution. And I will say that, Kenny, the thing you said about I think it's important to actually get to some of the stuff that Jake was saying in his article, to use that to begin to say there's something else going on. You cannot understand this in terms of health and safety. And this was one of the quotes that I pulled out of there that was big for me. Jake, who was the dude who was for the Dutch Fran Lewin or something like that?
It's Leeuwen. I do not know how you pronounce that.
What's his first name? Do you remember?
Fred. It's Fred. Fred
Lewin, right. And so this is, there's a lot of things in the article, but what was really amazing to me is in 2018, this guy's writing about essentially something about like, how do we build education for the fourth industrial revolution? That's the title of the goddamn thing. Is that 2018, right?
Yeah, that was it was published by Routledge and has several co-authors. That's his endorsement of it. And the foreword to that book, by the way, is written by Klaus Schwab himself.
Okay, right.
So, about it. Yeah.
And so here he wrote, innovations in technology today. And again, remember, this is written before this whole remote crap. Make it possible to synthesize, analyze data, to tailor pedagogy to individual student needs and provide feedback in real time, significantly reduce costs, allow students from drastically different parts of the world to collaborate on projects. Yeah, that's what this is about. And create platforms for sharing best practices. Only a strategic integration of personal coaching and digital learning can provide both the technological and human-centered skills necessary to thrive in the fourth industrial revolution. So for me, it's like, this is a plan. And we're just seeing how people this fear of sickness is being used to drive one piece of this plan of separating people, of mass data collection, of getting enough data to build AI systems that can both replace workers, but also help manage students and manage future workforces on a mass scale with all that data coming in. And the thing that kills me is that Chicago is actually talking and has actually really kind of done a strike on Wednesday. Like they did what would be called a strike. And the strike is a tool of the working class. And currently that most important tool of the working class is being not just used as a weapon against other sections of the class, like other parents and things like that. As Jessica's pointing out, it actually hurts the interest of the workers who are doing the strike. And the only beneficiary of that, of the use of the most important working class weapon, the strike, the only beneficiary is the fourth industrial revolution, the state, the big tech. That's it. Those are the people who win from this. And I don't even know what to say when we're in a situation where the one thing that is the most important weapon that I believe that the working class can use for its own interests has now been turned against itself and turned as a weapon. It's not even, I don't even know if it's being used by the capitalist class. They've just sort of let it go, and here it goes, because I don't think our school district likes this happening, but I guarantee you people like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, they must be laughing, like just going like, these people are idiots, and thinking that they're just going to have their way. So that's just something I was thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think if and when we move to permanent remote learning as the model, there will be no picket lines, ever. You can't have a picket line in that system. So it's so backwards to me that people can't see that. Unions can't see that. I mean, the grassroots part of unions, not the leadership.
And one thing, Jessica, I want to come back to you. I went remote this week, and when I teach all my students on at 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, all my sections of 6th grade and 7th grade are all massed into one class, and I teach them all. What does that say when you talk about cost saving? Instead of me teaching 5 different classes, okay, now I can teach 5 of those classes at once. That should tell you what this thing's about. That should tell you that this is about ultimately moving to a situation. That's what the cost savings comes in, where one teacher with an AI helper, and then ultimately just the AI themselves, can teach masses and masses of students. Sorry, Jessica.
No, I mean, you might as well put a barcode on their heads.
Right.
But and also, I also from reading your article, Jake, the push for this, we always is not new. I started college in 2005 at UC Berkeley. I went to college, I was there for 4.5 years, and online learning was already a thing. This is not new, and now that, for example, as a restaurant manager, I am forced to check vaccination in order to allow indoor service for people to my restaurant. I see kids from college that show their proof of vaccination on their fucking dashboard from their university. So we are that future that we're talking about. It's already being actually pretty much implemented at universities. Because the blockchain situation that we've been talking about on their shows, it's not a future. It's what and what I'm realizing is that the pieces have been there. It's just like you said, Lips, in the previous show, that it takes waves to advance and synthesize and solidify this system of surveillance. But the pieces, the ingredients are already there. And maybe you can say more to that, Jake. That this is not new. That there, and that's where I think the link to the systems of global governance come into play.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at some point, I think I want to pull up the map and just so we can see WEF EI, UNESCO and some of the people involved in companies, and just so you can kind of visually see it. But I at this point, I do want to build on something that you just said, which is, and that this is why I asked Jessica earlier whether or not those tests were provided on that dashboard, because we know that the testing companies like Color Labs and Vault, that they also traffic in genomic sequencing. Now they say that, right, they destroy your test sample, so many days after, and that they do not do anything with that sample. They do not sequence it at any point. And but again, as we've just mentioned, right, it's only a matter of time. I mean, the infrastructure is there for one day for them to say, yeah, I mean, we've got the test, we've got the service, all we've got to do is sequence it, right? And at the same time, well, the learning management dashboards, there's an LMS company called Agilix. So it's Agilix, and it is connected to its one of its parent companies. It's basically a subsidiary of, or a satellite or a branch of Ancestry.com. Okay, so you've got the learning management systems, the LMSs, connected to companies that traffic in basically tracking your heredity. I don't know that Ancestry actually does like genomics sequencing like 23andMe does. I think it largely does like family tree stuff, right? But you can still see the connections between tracing your biological heritage, sequencing your genomics, and then your ed tech data. So what that could enable down the pipe is for these companies to correlate particular gene sequences with particular learning algorithms, right? And this is something that's called precision education that I wrote about in my book, where eventually they want to personalize your education, your lessons, your career pathways, your digital badges for your workforce training certificates, that they want to personalize those lesson plans, et cetera, based on your genetic capacity. And the way they'll do that is to say that everybody who does poorly on this learning module, on this learning management system, based on their DNA that we've tested, has this particular sequence. So we can say, right, one day that before you even put anything into the learning management system, before you get any learning data, we already know you've got that gene where we know you're not going to do very well on this career pathway, so we're not even going to offer it to you, right? That would be a waste of money and a waste of time, and it would probably be cruel to make you to attempt that, right? And so this could easily be, we're looking at how a lot of the infrastructure that is being leveraged right now did not come here overnight, right? And so it's only a couple of steps for the next iteration. And so I wanted to note that.
And also in there will be social emotional factors too, which is so perfect given that all of this push to remote learning is totally destroying everybody's mental health, especially young people.
Yeah, that Google I saw was having like these wellness checks through like the Google Sheets, and that I've been seeing recently on the commercials on TV, this new campaign. It's something like Stop the Stigma or Fight the Stigma, and what it means is the stigma of mental health issues, right? And basically it's a promotion to just like to share all your mental health stuff with, it sounds like it's, share it with a trusted friend or something, but I mean, priming you to be constantly checking in on your LMS, not just like you said, your learning data, but like, how do you feel today, right? Like, are you feeling too stressed out from being locked down? And then as you know, right, well, now we can start correlating different conditions with that. And maybe we're going to give you some SSRIs, right, for your serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or, ADHD medicines, et cetera, right?
Yep.
And a lot of this information, it's already being collected. It's just not being openly used or disclosed, like dating apps, right? They know when you're lonely. They know when you feel, horny. They know when all these things. And based on that, just like also Instagram, they know, same things when you're feeling a certain way, and then when you're not active on Instagram, they send you a notification, so to gratify you, and notifications connect to all these systems of pleasure and satisfaction, and so and again, it's not that distance of connecting all these systems of bio and psychological surveillance, they're right there. It's just a matter of connecting everything into the system, the blockchain, right? Like in order to have a complete picture, and to what Alison McDowell refers to as digital identities.
Yeah, and also actually someone from our Workers and Students for Choice group sent me some research on Navigate in particular, which my institution uses for like advising purposes and data collection. And I guess they I don't know how long ago it was, but they were including students' race on there and then using it as like a predetermining factor for where they would like place students. So these systems are totally racist. And I also, Kenny, what you said, it reminded me, I had obviously, I got a new health insurance since I started a new job. And when I had to do all my sign up stuff, there was like almost like an incentive health quiz thing where did you have to do that too? And I mean, I looked at it and it was the most extensive thing I have ever seen. It was like, how many servings of fish do you eat per, and then mental health, and I mean every detail of your life. And I forget if you got like a cash, like just straight cash, or if it was like applied to your premiums or what. But I mean, it was literally like, do this, we'll give you money.
I had the same experience actually last week doing that same process, 50 questions, where they ask you the same question from, I'm not stupid. I know you're doing the same shit from different angles to get to a point, and they give you like a heart rate score, right? Or like how old is your heart rate,
It's like a little, like, it's almost like a Facebook quiz with like the colors and like you scored 76, but like you could exercise more.
It's kind of like a game because it's a rewards, a bonus, achievements, and then they give you, at least for me, a discount, for the year, which they couldn't give it to you just upfront. You have to earn it, and for me, it also involves getting tested. And having my doctor or one of their partner companies getting my bio information, like cholesterol, heart situation, diabetes, all the tests that we usually get, and uploading them to their system, and me authorizing that they uploaded to that central system. So there's all this interconnectedness happening.
Isn't it nice that all our health insurance information is tied to our employer? America.
And they asked you about the COVID vaccine too, by the way. You had to attest as well that you were not vaccinated.
Well, the thing that I've been thinking about, I mean, maybe y'all are you've already thought that, but I just keep thinking about the way we talk about algorithms in our Google search engine, right? How it kind of shapes a world around us based on our inputs. And now, as we centralize more of this data and move it towards digital ID and then your genetic data, and I mean, that's like the movie theme from that movie Gattaca, right? Where essentially your bio data, your educational experience, what you're doing on social media, what you spend money on, all that information can essentially be used by an algorithm to kind of shape your world, where you might think that you're seeing the entire world, but you're not. You're seeing the world that you're allowed to see based on your DNA, based on your spending habits, based on your background, based on your education, and based on any inputs you put in there. And it's like literally we're building a system where and particularly when this remote system keeps us so separate, the only thing that might allow us to not know we're living in a bubble is to talk to somebody else to know what their bubble is. And they're like, well, that's your bubble? I mean, that's what we experience that all the time. So it really is frightening to me how effective this could be. At the very least, because I don't think this is stable for capitalism to do this, but I certainly think it does to the working class what I wasn't sure that they would be able to do, which is literally just atomizes. And then I don't know what to say when the working class starts waging struggles that are actually against its own class interests. And then now it's doubly confusing to me. So this is it's a really dismaying thing where I'm not for Chicago Lori Lightfoot. I'm not for, the state, but I'm not for these unions either. Like they're doing the wrong thing, and there's no one I can get behind on any of this. And I try to think, well, what would teachers have to do? And I think they would have to go back and be with their students and be with each other. And I keep coming back to the notion, like the Luddites of old, that we would literally just have to dismantle all the ed tech and rip it up from as best we can within there, and like paper and pencil and all that kind of stuff. But we're so far away from that. Teachers
they won't do it. I mean, they won't do it.
Yeah. I mean,
I felt like a dinosaur the other day, like handing out a paper syllabus. And the kids are like, what is this?
But this is what came up in our Workers and Students for Choice. And I do think this might be the future, which gets back to getting out of the institutional education, including even the school I'm working in, which isn't as much connected, but going into a more homeschool pod sort of teaching people like that are not part of any institution. And that's kind of what this came up in our meeting yesterday at Workers and Students for Choice, about people saying we have to get out of public education because we don't want our kids vaccinated. So we're trying to figure out, how do we find teachers who can do something that will actually be free, not free financially, but literally like liberated. And I think that's going to be a part of what will need to happen, is these institutions are going to have to be destroyed and abandoned.
Well, definitely, I do think that that idea, and I don't know how to get the ball rolling. I mean, you and I have talked about this a lot, Andy, as far as like, what do the next steps look like? But I guess some of that's the networking that we're doing. Y'all over there in California way more than anything I got going over here. I mean, you at least got some local groups where you could actually start doing some small little pods or whatever you want to call them. But definitely, and I think the more that grows, that the more that the public education system will have to, I mean, I don't know that. I mean, I surmise if it could get a big enough movement, so to speak, where the pod movement, I mean, enough people start taking their kids out of the public schools and having these organic, real community education, not their community, which is public-private partnership stuff through the public schools and the charter schools, etc. But, enough people come out of the system, because the first thing they lose is the money just based on attendance. And then, do they make an adjustment? I don't know. Maybe they start to back off some of the stuff to try to get people to come back in. I don't know that means once that we got something off the ground with, the families and educators and students and parents and everybody, sharing in an organic way outside the corporate state system. That once we get that going, I don't know that we would even need to or want to go back to the these official institutions, but to the extent that they might be able to provide some extra resources, if they were willing to decant all of this craziness. I mean, maybe then we could transition back, but one way or another, for the time being, yeah, I really do. Like I always say, I wrote that book as tried to make it a defense of public education, but I cannot do that. I cannot. If I don't have kids, but if I did, I would not be putting them. They'd have been gone at the beginning of this. And so, I can't. I can't really defend it. I know I'm still teaching there, and I hope that by me being there, I can at least, have my students read about what is the social credit system, looking at Fourth Industrial Revolution stuff, looking at the Bobby Kennedy debate with Dershowitz. You know what I mean? I've had them reading that, watching that debate since the first year of this, right? So I mean, at least they're getting an alternative perspective. You know, and so to that extent, I'm still 1 foot in, 1 foot out, but definitely, we got to build a parallel structure is the term that's used for those structures that you can counter the totalitarian state with.
The scary part to me is that, you know, this kids are already being conditioned to the social credit system outside these institutions, you know, like with the systems of validation and, you know, and reward and, like Instagram and, you know, TikTok and all these things, you know, that is, I think, a precursor to, like, basically in plain words, I don't think many kids will see anything wrong with a social credit system because they've already been in one. And so how do you combat that, you know? And that, yes, you know, these alternatives of education, but to me, you cannot dismiss the role of the family, you know, in the community, in that, you know, as part of this alternative education.
I agree. And I do think, I mean, they already have been trying to atomize like the homeschooling communities for years already. I mean, I know in Washington, the laws are crazy about like how you can conduct homeschooling, like whether you want to come at it from like a teacher or tutor perspective or as the parent. So I totally agree. I don't think the system can be changed radically or overthrown from the inside out. I think it has to happen outside parallel structures or whatnot. Even realizing that I'm saying that as somebody who's still, you know, like you said, Jake, got 1 foot in, and but yeah, I think we also have to be like very vigilant about, you know, we can't just walk away and be like, well, let's go do our own thing, because they really want control over every aspect. And then, yeah, with regard to the family structure, I think that's again another example of where the technology, I don't know how to get people to get rid of their fucking phones, but I mean, it really is like students, kids, they're on these devices 24/7, at the dinner table, at family functions, everything. And it's, you know, and you can see the way that it sometimes sort of impedes, and the older you get, I mean, I remember being a 14-year-old kid, right? Like, you don't want to listen to your parents. You want to do what your peers are doing. You want to do what's cool. And unfortunately now it's like the most anti-punk generation of all time. Like, corporations are cool and being woke is cool, and I don't know, wearing 3 masks. It's really hard to overcome. And it puts a lot of pressure on us as teachers too, I think. Like, I feel that. I'm like, whoa, it's a big job.
I used to joke with my students. I remember once upon a time, back in the old normal days, when I used to go into a classroom, if I would get there, you know, and there would be a few students already in there. And, you know, if I would get relatively close to the starting point, you know, there would be a significant number of people there. And the lights were always off. And they would go in and they would sit down. This was at both schools. At any given class, you know, English 99 all the way to 102. And they would sit down in the dark with their phones on and these little glows in their faces. And I would always go in and I'd say, yeah, I don't know, you can turn the lights on, right? Like, you don't have to, like, you can turn them on, you know, and socialize. And they never did it. They would sit there, and it was like very like sci-fi. And I would kind of chuckle, like, at the time. I mean, it's at one level, it was always kind of spooky. But I mean, you know, in retrospect, it's extra spooky in the context of everything we're talking about. But I would joke and say, you know, one day they're going to put those phones in your heads. They're going to plug them straight in your heads. And I don't know if y'all know this, but when Elon Musk, when he first rolled out Neuralink, he basically said it would hook up to an app on your phone, right? And so it was like literally they're going to hook the phones up to your head. And so as you know, like, yeah, I mean, you know, and then the faculty, like our colleagues, like there's like this like 1-to-1 ratio of technology good and new technology better, right? It's not like, well, what type of technology is this? What does it do? What's the privacy policy? When I was the adjunct rep on the CARES committee, and we had all this money to get digital technologies. A lot of it was PPE, but as an adjunct teacher, it was largely what our little subcommittee looked at. And we were supposed to review all these different proposals for like simulators and dashboards and different apps and stuff. And I swear I was like the only person, like I was always either no or I need more information. Like the proposal were like, we want a simulator for this class. And I'm like, what type of simulator? What specific company? What's the efficacy for the actual technology? And what's the privacy statement? And most of the time, like nobody would chime in and like, let's talk about that. It was like everybody else's rubber stamp. Yes. We need technology. You know, I guess we'll jam something in and we'll figure out how it works. And so, you know, and then with the parents too. I mean, it's not just the students and the faculty, but you probably have all seen, you know, you go somewhere and there's you know, a family and the kids are hyper or whatever, and it's like they give them the device as like a babysitter, like this will preoccupy the child so that they're not noisy in public or rambunctious. And it's like, you know, at all these different levels, like it wouldn't matter, like if we all lived in the same neighborhood, right, and we could, everybody at schools students and workers for choice, if we were like all neighbors, right, I don't know that we would even be able to do anything like in complete solidarity with like laser focus and agreement on like how to get some kind of a rally or protest petition movement, as long as everything I just mentioned, as long as students, you know, younger people want to live on the phones to be cool and be entertained, as long as parents want to use it as a babysitter, as long as teachers, you know, basically worship it as, you know, the be all end all of, you know, everything, the best practices, you know what I mean? Like that those things has to happen. So the only option really is, you know, to build some small pods and maybe hopefully, you know, those pods can network with each other, and maybe some of the other people we just mentioned come around. But otherwise, you know, I don't know that. I mean, it's like two different universes. I don't know that you can reach across that. You know, all you can really do is create something somewhere else with people of like mind.
I do think if people see it, you know, it's really hard where we are right now. But I think for people to change their beliefs and then certainly change their actions, like you kind of have to believe fully that another alternative is possible. And I think a lot of us, not just during COVID, but, you know, like we can't imagine an alternative to capitalism, or we can't imagine an alternative to technocracy, right? And that's how I hear a lot of people talk about, like when I bring up like, well, what about like the privacy statement on Canvas, or what about, you know, the effect of Instagram on the mental health of young teenage girls? You know, it's like, well, yeah, that stuff I totally acknowledge, it's terrible, but like, what's the alternative? Like, this technology is what we have and we have to use it. But I do think if people kind of start to see people doing something else on a larger scale than right now, I don't know, it would give me more hope than I currently have.
I was watching this episode of Explain on Netflix, you know, and they were talking about this hurricane that happened in Puerto Rico, right? Hurricane Maria that destroyed the power grid, and you know, this area of Loaiza, in the northern part of Puerto Rico, this community, they're very used to dancing together, in creating music together, And after the hurricane came, that community came together. And one of the organizers of that community said that, communities that dance together work together. And again, it just, to me, it also reminds me that, when my partner and I went to Canada, and I shared this story in a previous episode, the kids that were part of, the funeral, or post the funeral, we got together, and the kids were all connected using avatars and very plugged into their iPads. But my partner, who's not very much about technology, she lost it. She was like, "What the fuck?" And when she took it upon herself to go play with them, and then the kids snapped out of it, and the kids started fucking being kids, getting crazy and playing and being creative. And so that leads me to a quote that I want to share that I think is, it's from Asata Shakur. And she says that part of being a revolutionary is creating a vision that is more humane, that is more fun too, that is more loving. It's really working to create something beautiful. And that is going to require us to come together physically, right? And so we can play, so we can dance together, so we can share, what's happening in our bubbles together, and whether it be at your own school, and so you can organize and talk shit about the shitty shit that's happening, whether it's at your work site, right, in a different industry, and so another thing that I remember is one time we were with a psychologist who was trying to give therapy as a group to the group of community organizers, because we went to a lot of trauma organizing to help families in need because of the lockdowns. And so she told us too that kids do as parents do, not as parents say. So I think there's still responsibility on us, the adults, to show kids, an alternative that is more fun, that is more humane, and so I understand this is fucking depressive, like what the things that we're talking about is a tall task, but yes, we're doing it for ourselves, but we're also doing it for those kids, because we're probably not going to be fully trapped in these systems, but they might.
I'm trying to think about why has this been such a difficult experience for me to see what's going on and to hear about Chicago and to see what's happening in my former union, UESF, and really to see the members push for this. And I was looking at this book up here. It's called Labor Wars, written by Sidney Lenz. And what he was trying to do was he was trying to explain what caused the struggles of the class in the 30s. And so he wrote a book about the decade of the 20s, of a period of miners' strikes and all sorts of industry strikes, very violent, brutal, and defeat after defeat after defeat. Really just a decade of working class defeats during the course of that struggle. But what his thesis is the bitterness of those defeats is really what essentially trained the class for the fact that it was fighting a war, and that it needed to fight the war more seriously if it was going to win. And that's how he understood how the class came to what it came to in the context of the 30s. There was a Communist Party and things like that had a more radicalizing role as well. But he speaks about the experience of the struggle and the experience of actually defeat. A decade of defeats was necessary. And I think about what's happening right now. And maybe there's other sectors that are doing better things, but I think about the teachers union. What lessons do you learn when you wage a strike like this? When you wage a strike against your own class? What, in the name ultimately of the capitalist class, and you don't even know that that's what you're doing. Like what kind of lesson do you learn out of that struggle? I actually don't know. Like, I feel like it just feels awful. It seems awful. It seems like that's the kind of class struggle that produces confusion, demoralization, and mayhem. And I was anticipating a decade of defeats and struggle. That's kind of what I had said as we talked about strikes before in my union. I said, dude, we're going to have to learn to lose before we're going to learn to win, as Jake knows in fighting. But, and you too, Jessica. So, but I would say that I don't think you learn any lessons when you do these kinds of organizing. When you wage a strike, that benefits the bosses and hurts your own class. And it's so for me, I'm like, how are we going to learn? Because I know we have to get out. Like, it is true, we will have to exit and build an alternative. But that alternative, if it's meaningful, is going to have to be an alternative which comes back and fights in the name of the system. Because as Brandy and I have been talking, like, there is no exit and build, and you just build your own thing and it's all good. At some point, we are going to be faced with the people who run the society saying, what you're doing is too successful and it has to go. And so that's the question for me, is how are we going to learn lessons of struggle out of things like this when it's completely backwards? It took the working class a decade of actually struggle of losses to learn what it learned in the 30s. What do we learn out of nonsense like this? And so it's very confounding for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's no courage in what those Chicago teachers are doing, like, at all, from any angle. Yeah, I wanted to just comment on, like, the framing of it as a war, because I think as much as I'm 100% behind building beautiful, human parallel structures and societies, I do also think, like, this is going to be violent. It's already violent. And a lot of that violence, like, on our side, like, I see as self-defense. I mean, I used to be, like, a big pacifist, but I think, that's the only way I can see to frame it. And I do think we have to grow a little bit of a backbone as, a collective grassroots movement or group of movements. Like, I was looking at, did you guys see that? I think it was over in France, some activists, like, just tearing down 5G towers, like, just destroying them. And apparently there's been, like, I think several hundred, maybe that's too high, in the past, like, year or so, all over France, not just 5G towers, but technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, of power, and that type of direct action, I think, is going to be necessary too, because it is a war, and it is self-defense.
I don't think that the January 6th, which is tomorrow, by the way, well, when people watch this, it'll be a couple days ago, I guess, but it'll be tomorrow from when we're recording. I don't think that which I think is another psyop, is a false flag, and I don't need to go into the details, but there's plenty there. And the provocateurs there were the people that were brought there, the whole framing, and the response, which is now, right, the domestic war on terror. That's not an accident that it's in the midst of COVID and the fourth industrial revolution, and it didn't take long for people to for DHS to list, right, COVID deniers and conspiracy theorists as domestic terrorists. And so I do think that they are prepared for that, and I almost feel like they want to foment something in order so that they can crack down harder and to preempt, right? So self-defense is self-defense, right? I mean, that's, to me, that's not a violent action, right? So, but I would be extremely careful about how it's approached, and I would try to. They will want, with this domestic terror law, the whole idea here is to have the moral high ground. So to make it look like, or to egg one side into acting first, right? So then whoever's the aggressor, the other side gets to be justified, right? And so if protesters of right, left, all walks of life who want to be free and don't want to be jabbed and want to be humans and in person, if they can be framed as the aggressors, if they can be framed as the insurrectionists, is the word they love to throw around now, then they will be justified in not only using brutal violence, but actually preemptive, right? Like pre-crime stuff. Like, oh, like, you know, like you posted something, so we just kicked your door in and snatched you up.
Totally. Yeah. Just to be clear, I'm not suggesting people like willy nilly just go like tearing down shit, but at the same time, like they're sticking needles into our children. It's like, what the fuck? And I would have been totally behind January 6th if it had been a real coup. You know, maybe just cast those little ropes aside. But yeah, totally agree. It was not.
Kenny, do you want to comment on this? I was just
No, and obviously this is stuff that, will have to be discussed depending on the context of the time, and, a strategy needs to be planned. But, I do think of, and I think some people, depending on the worldview, will be controversial. I think of Vietnam, right? I think of the Taliban, right? This ragtag group of people that defeated empires with superior technology. And these people were vilified as violent and backwards, and and all the systems were against them, and yet they found a goddamn way to drive at a high cost. And so all I'm saying is that it's worth taking a look at them too, at these people, because I think there are lessons there too.
There's a really good book called How Nonviolence Protects the State. And he goes through a bunch of different examples, like including Vietnam, including civil rights. And that book like really shifted my mindset when I read it.
I think the one thing I would say after this discussion, as a person who's had many discussions with Jake about violence and nonviolence and been on the violence side, we'll have to use violence if we need, is though I have to say, okay, for me, I think the next steps do feel like exit, and the next steps do feel like build. Like my foot is currently trapped in institutional education, and if there's a next step for me within the context of a movement that I want to build, I do think it's about exiting that and building an alternative. So what comes to mind for me is it is about, in some ways, exit and build, and building something that is worth defending. Like if we can build something that we actually feel like is worth defending, then we're getting somewhere. But I think people who are trying to exit and build understand that if it's worth defending, you will have to defend it. Like it's not a question of if, or it's not anything that's worth building like that is going to be taken on by the institutions. So I don't think our next step is figuring out how to defend it, because we have to build it first, and we have to learn how to do that. And that probably is more our next step than how to, defend yourself or play offense with violence, if you will. But I do think as we do this, we are going to have to keep in the back of our mind that if we really like what we're doing, that we're going to also have to learn how to defend it from people who don't.
Does that mean we're starting a school or a homeschooling co-op?
Well, I mean, there was discussion of people that discussion is starting in Workers and Students for Choice in the Bay Area. And I think I want to be part of that discussion. I'm not sure how long my employment will last here. And I don't even know how long they'll be able to be free of the vaccine mandates, because once they aren't, I'm out. And I want to find some alternative. And frankly, I think if we're successful here, then Jessica, we'll be telling you about how we did it. And then you might find some folks somewhere along the way, a year later, 2 years down the line. That's how I think it's going to be, is like, it's going to be word of mouth. So that's why I think these connections that we're building right now are so important. So that so information we have about what we've been able to do can be spread as quickly as possible.
At a certain point, I mean, they spent a lot of time and a lot of money trying to build their fourth industrial revolution. So as Orwell says, when basically, I'm paraphrasing, but it's to the effect that, like, when propaganda fails, right? Like, in other words, when you stop obeying and you create that parallel structure, however peaceful it might be, then, right, the gloves come off. The state, the naked iron fist that was behind the propaganda comes out and becomes exposed. And so, barring their ability to co-opt any, opposing movements, I mean, you basically can expect that. I mean, at some point. But in the meantime, like I said, I'm even, I've mentioned this at the meetings, like, I'm even wary of even framing things as like protests, if I'm functioning at the level of psychological war, which is to me the brunt of what we are facing at this time, like, that they as John Lennon said, like, they know how to deal with violence. Like, they want to stir you up. They want to get you there, because then they can, sorry, dog's barking. Then they have justification to do that. So, like, I mean, and this kind of ties in with what Kenny was saying too, though. Like, I like the idea of just like festivals and like maybe dances, parties, get-togethers, like, where you can network and build these communities and parallel structures without any connotation of we're not fighting anything. We're just doing our own thing, right? And in the meantime, like, as you mentioned, like I think that art and music and play and dance and things like that has to be part of that community building, not just like politics and ideas and organizing and stuff, because something worth defending is human, and that involves not just constantly struggling, right? It means like enjoying the simple pleasures of relationships, and that's what will attract youth, so to speak, right? And so, I mean, to that extent, I am 99.9% pacifist unless somebody is crossing my bubble, crossing my space, right? But and the other thing you have to also be careful of in the meantime, as you try to get those community, organic things moving, is provocateurs being inserted in your groups who will try to stir the pot, right, and to make things unnecessarily inflammatory in order to, right, justify preemptive action against whatever kind of movement we can get. But one way or another, I agree that what needs to happen is relationship building, right? Not relationship battling, so to speak.
And any Kenny or Jessica, any last thoughts? Well, let's wrap up then. Well, first off, once again, Jessica and Jake, thanks for being here. I'm stopping thinking of you as, now you're just co-hosts as well as me and Kenny and Eduardo. So
when's Eduardo coming back?
I don't know. I
mean, I like being here, but do we get him back?
He's having too much fun with his grandma.
Yeah, he's saying, if you check out Facebook, you'll see what's going on with Eduardo.
I deleted it. I deleted my account. I was like, I'm not going into 2022 with a Facebook account. Not with this pre-crime shit.
Oh, that's right. No wonder I haven't seen any of your stuff. So
yeah,
that was your New Year's resolution. You stuck to it. Good for you. Anyway, that'll do it for this week's episode. But What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode, or on our blog, what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our 8 platforms, or 9 platforms now. They're on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Telegram, and I'm putting stuff on Rumble now. So if you like any of that, you can hear some of that stuff there. That's it. Jessica, Jake, and Kenny, thank you very much for today's discussion. Even though some of it was kind of depressing for me, it definitely made it better talking about it with y'all.
Thanks for having us.
All right, see you next week.